Everyone, and welcome to another Surge Strength webinar. Hope you're doing well. I'm going to share my screen here and let's get this show on the road. 1 second. All right. Talking pull-ups today. Hope you guys are ready. And if you haven't already, if you don't know the drill, if this is one of your first webinars, please put your name and where you're from in the chat. Always appreciate seeing who's taken the time to join us live. I know a lot of you catch these replays because schedules and everything, but appreciate everyone that is with us live. So introduce yourself in the chat, name where you're from, and then I always like to see who is here. So if you could answer the poll question for me, I'd appreciate it. I always like to see what kind of mix I get between swimmers, coaches, parents. I know some of you are a combo. If you are a combo, think about the number one thing that you're looking for Dryland from. So if I'm a parent, coach, and I swim, I'm maybe thinking I'm a coach because that influences a lot. Wow, a lot of coaches. 70%. Awesome. And this is going to be an interactive webinar. We'll have Q&A at the end. So hold your questions during the presentation. I'm not going to be able to see them until the end, just to let you know. And I would love to know, is this your first time or not at a Surge webinar? All right, a lot of returns. Oh, good bit of new people still. Almost at 50%, 42%. Awesome. Welcome, guys. If you don't know me, I'm Chris Ritter. Swam for a long time. Did strength coaching for swimmers, CEO of Ritter Sports Performance. And a few years ago, we created the Surge Strength Dryland certification. And we've been doing Dryland programming for a long time now. And a lot of our resources, if you haven't checked them out, are in the Surge Strength Academy. So if you go to surgestrength.com, we'll talk about it a little bit more at the end. And actually, I want to know how many of you are actually in the academy. We have a ton of 101 courses for free. If you're a coach, swimmer, parent, we got free Dryland courses for you. Ooh, a lot of no's. Why not? Why not? It's free. If you took time out of your day to be with me on this webinar where we talk pull-ups, you have to register for the free 101s. All right, a few more people. All right, so it's almost 50-50. Not bad. Still more of you. It's free, guys. Sign up. Like I said, we have a lot of resources as well. These webinars we're doing pretty regular, planning them out from now through the fall right now, kind of figuring out what we're going to be doing and covering. And of course, we always have our podcast as well. New episode. I'm finishing up editing. It's another interview testimonial with a young lady that we've been working with for over a year now. She's about to go off to college in the fall, and just how much her swimming career and performance and the level of colleges she was able to look at improved because of the Dryland. So look for that. I'm not sure when I'll get that episode out. Actually, hopefully in the next week or so, but check that out on the Surge Strength feed. And of course, we have our Dryland programs. We're onboarding a ton of teams and individuals. Talk more about this at the end, but we've worked with everyone from Olympic gold medalists all the way down to beginner swimmers, 12-year-olds, whatever you have, Dryland, we do. But we are here today to talk about pull-ups. So before we get into this, I want to know, can you do at least 5 good pull-ups? Let me know. I want to know who I'm talking to. All right. All right, so about a third of you can and 2/3 cannot. Now, that was about what I was going to guess was going to be the results. Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for your interaction. So now I'm going to go into presentation mode here. I can see my and we're going to be off and running here. So if you can make sure, oh, hold on one second, guys, technical difficulties on my end. All right. So make sure to put away all distractions. Let's rock and roll with this show here. Now, I know 2/3 of you that answered the question, basically you could scratch out, there is no strength when it comes to pull-ups, Chris. We're going to help you with that. We're going to walk through exercises, progressions on this, and a little bit about why pull-ups are so important for swimmers. So this is the third webinar we've done in this kind of new series. First was on core. Last one is on shoulder health. This is on pull-ups. I really think these three things should be the cornerstone for your Dryland program for swimmers, is what we're talking about, right? How to be faster in the water ultimately. And I think these key things are really what we need to focus on. So this is kind of the third one in our initial webinar here. And so this is what we're going to talk about today. How do we connect pull-ups to swimming? How do we test pull-up strength? And some of you already answered, hey, Chris, we don't need to test anything, right? If you're at 0 or 1, but there are different tests we can do if you can't do pull-ups to allow us to progress so that you can do pull-ups. We'll talk about that. And then once we get to our first pull-ups and beyond. So as always, I have a lot of slides. Let's jump into it with the connection to swimming first. So if you've been on a few webinars before, you've inevitably seen this slide. This is how we think about Dryland being swimming specific. Can we help a swimmer have better position in the water? And or can we allow them to show more tension, greater tension, hold tension longer in the water? You think about your pulling, your kicking, even your streamline. This is how we make Dryland swimming specific. So pull-ups in this, obviously tension part, right? Almost every stroke has a pulling phase where the lat is a huge part of that movement. And so when we look at this graph about the strength as our base of our pyramid, a lot of people, swimmers, coaches will come to me, Chris, my swimmer needs more endurance, need more power. I always go to what is the strength level of your swimmer first. And so we want to build that strength out as big a base as possible to then we can start to get specific on power, endurance based on strokes, events, things like that. But strength is really the cornerstone of this. And this is why pull-ups are so important. We need that base strength so then you can express that specific power and endurance in the water. So if you're dying on the back end or your legs aren't where you want to be, or you're working with swimmers where that's the case, a lot of times it's strength. It's not just, well, they need more endurance, they need more power. If their strength base is really small, then that means the power and endurance is going to be really small as well. So we need to widen the base of strength. And this is kind of talking or a different way of talking about what I was saying earlier in the three big components that I see in Dryland training. And so you can see we've already had a webinar about core. So swimmers need strong core, mobility, specifically about the shoulders. That was our last webinar. This webinar, we're going on the first one here, a high strength to mass ratio. And pull-ups is by far the number one exercise that exhibits that. Or as for 2/3 of the audience, it's showing we need to do some improvement in this area. So especially when I was a coach and I had swimmers in Dryland that couldn't really do pull-ups, it was almost like an all or nothing thing, right? The kids that could do a bunch of pull-ups, they were all about pull-ups. Let's do pull-ups all day. But the kids that couldn't, they shied away from it. And that's why we're going to dig into the progressions, because it's so important to make sure you're able to progress swimmers or yourself if you can't do pull-ups to the point that you can do pull-ups. And it may seem like a big task, but over time we can do it just step by step here. A big thing to think about off the bat before we get into how to assess, how to get better pull-ups is your core engaged while you're doing pull-ups? And a lot of swimmers and coaches don't even think about this concept, but there's a big difference between just pulling dead weight off the ground, literally where everything's just limp and you're just focusing on what your arms and lats are doing, versus just engage the core a little bit. If you were with us for our previous webinar, the first one where we talked about core, that little gut punch test, right? Where right now I'm pretty tight in my core, I'm punching myself, but I'm still being able to breathe and talk. It's just that kind. It doesn't need to be like a ground down, really like engaged on a 10 or 11 level, just a little bit. That can make a huge difference in your ability to do pull-ups. The other thing related to core, and we definitely talked about this in that webinar, is that your level of bracing, which is what we term the core movement category, that is directly translating to your proficiency in pushing and pulling, and pull-ups are obviously a big part of that. Now, the stronger we can get you, you are going to be better in the pool to ward off injuries and to train at a higher level more consistently. And that's what we're looking for. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier about the back half speed. Pull-ups can be huge in this because if we widen our base of strength, now in practices, we can work on that specific power and endurance, the back end of it, because we have added a couple pull-ups. And I have seen, especially with ladies, just even adding 1 or 2 pull-ups to their max. Not only are they able to come back home so much faster, but there's a confidence to them behind the blocks before the race. Like, yeah, I'm strong. I know it because of pull-up. If you could do a couple of pull-ups, you could tell yourself, yeah, I'm really strong. Not a lot of exercises have that immediate effect psychologically that I've seen. The other thing, this goes more into the back half speed too, is that if we think about this concept called reserve capacity, and that basically means the faster your top speed or the total strength that you have, when you go out in a race, I mean, except for the 50, right? But every other race, there's at least some element of easy speed that you want at the first half of that race, so you're not dying coming back. Well, if we increase your strength, that means your easy speed also goes up a notch or two. And when that, not only are we going faster now, but it's still at an easy speed, that is more in reserve to come back at the end of the race. So pull-ups can be a real game changer if you're just stuck trying to think, how do I come back better? No matter if it's at the end of the 100, 200, 800 mile, 10K, whatever the distance is, pull-ups can be huge in helping that back half speed come through and not getting that piano on your back, because it's all about widening the base here. So now let's talk about actually how do we test pull-up strength? And again, there are 2 schools, right? Some of you can do pull-ups, some of you can't. We're going to dive into each of these now. So the pull-up test, this is if you know you can do at least 1 pull-up. If you're not sure, let's start with this one first, okay? It's pretty simple. We're just going to start with the athlete hanging from the bar. Pull-ups too are overhand grip, so not underhand, that's chin up. Pull-ups are going to be overhand grip. You are going to start from a dead hang position, and then you're going to go up, no swinging, kipping, nothing like that. Make sure your chin all the way clears the bar, and then you're going to go back down. Don't have to necessarily lock out your elbows on the way down, but it should be fairly straight. Call it a loose elbow there. And so that's obviously the test. If you can do at least 1 pull-up, we're going to be doing this one. And if you tried it and you can't do any, no worries. We're going to get to that in a second. But here's how we think about it at Surge Strength, and these are coming from the curriculum we put together for those that are becoming Surge Strength Dryland certified, is we look at then, where are they at? If they're still, less than 5, we got a ways to go. We're at level 1. If they can get that +5, +3, and that's why I put that poll question out there, okay, we can still go a lot better from that. And of course, level 3, we're in double digits and plus on that. The most pull-ups I've ever seen done in a single session, I believe it was actually Mark Gangloff. I think he did 45 pull-ups. It was 42 or 45 pull-ups in one time. Now the head coach at UNC. That's pretty impressive. I almost got tired watching and having to count at that point there. So if you can't do a pull-up, here's how we're going to go about the assessment process then. It's called the flexed arm hang. And now the key to this is making sure you have something or some way to get the athlete up with their chin above the bar before you start the clock. So this is a timed exercise. It's not for reps. And we want to make sure we're in that pull-up position, right? Hand, overhand grip, not the underhand grip. So we'll see a video here. This athlete, obviously, we just saw him do a pull-up, so he has no problem getting up there. So the first part, I want you to use a box, a step, even a partner to kind of hoist you up there. Once the athlete's chin is over the bar, now you're going to start the timer. And you're going to time as long as they can hold that chin above the bar. As soon as the chin starts dipping, even if it's even halfway, time stops. And so then we're able to see how close are they to being able to accomplish a pull-up? And again, it's from SSDC here. This is how we think about the rubric here. So if it's less than 30 seconds, we have a lot of work to do. It is absolutely possible. I've seen it done time and time again. So don't think, oh, I'm a lost cause, I'm not going to be able to ever do a pull-up. It absolutely is the case. And I've had multiple athletes, even coaches say, yeah, I'm not sure that kid's ever going to do a pull-up. And every time we have had success. Sometimes it's taken longer than others, but I have yet to meet an athlete that we have not been able to get at least one pull-up. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than others, but that's okay. So you can see the 30 plus seconds, that's a little bit better. But once we get around a minute plus, if they can do that flexed arm hang, we're getting really close to being for them to be able to do a pull-up. So let's talk about first pull-ups and kind of how we build from there. So we're going to start with if you cannot do pull-ups. So you're probably on that flexed arm hang test. And let's say it's around that 30-second range or so. And let's see how we would go about helping an athlete in that way. Now, the other caveat too of why pull-ups are so important, we've already talked about the back half speed and how that's helpful. The other thing that pull-ups really help with is this eternal struggle of the swimmer. If you've been on previous webinars, especially the last one with shoulder, where we talked about the math of swimming and how any swimmer, even if you're doing a short yardage or low yardage program, the amount of rotations the shoulder has to go through. And we have to do something on dry land to counteract that. And pulling and making sure you have more pulling than pushing exercise in your dry land is a huge part of that. And pull-ups is what I would go to first in terms of pulling exercises. Now, the other little thing you might not be aware of, and a lot of people aren't, especially when they start trying to do pull-ups, or even if you can do 5+ pull-ups, I'd be curious if you think about this. It's called shoulder packing. Now, when you're rowing, it's a little bit easier and more counterintuitive. If you remember the wader carry, that's kind of the same concept where I don't want the shoulder out, I want it more in. And when you're hanging, that takes a lot of effort to think about that. You can either hang with now my shoulders are out of the socket or a little bit more up, and now they're packed in. I want that endpoint to be where they're packed in. That connects the shoulders more to the body, and you're going to be able to exhibit more strength as a result of that. It also keeps the shoulder in a slightly safer position. Not that pull-ups are inherently unsafe, more with the wader carry. I really want to make sure that's down in the socket, but it really has to do more with horizontal rowing, or if we're in a bent over row position, that we really want to make sure that shoulder is packed in. But for pull-ups too, this can change not only your performance, but just help with the overall health of the shoulder. So next time you're doing pull-ups, just think about, where are you starting? Are you starting with the shoulders a little bit out more? Or are they more packed in? We want more packed in there when we're doing it. So of course, this is what 2/3 of you are thinking right now. Why are pull-ups so hard, Chris? I can't even do 5. I'm struggling with it. Well, good news. I'm going to break down exactly why they are so hard, because they are one of the most difficult exercises we have swimmers do on dry land. So stay with me if don't have a background in kinesiology or biomechanics, but I need to explain it this way for you to understand why pull-ups are so difficult. It's all about the levers and what type of lever. So if we break down levers, and specifically in the body, we have 3 classes of levers here. And I'm not going to go over level 1 and 2, but essentially what you need to know is level 1 is one of the easiest levers, right? It's that seesaw. Everybody has seen that before, right? You get 2 kids, relatively same size, weight. It's going to be a pretty nice ride going back and forth. Not a lot of effort to have that work. If we go all the way over, though, we see the 3rd class lever. That's unfortunately what most of the skeletal muscles are set up as. And what that means is they have to produce a force much higher to move the object because the lever arm is so much longer. So let's break this down a little bit more, give you some visuals for this. So if we look at the lat, the prime mover in the pull-ups, okay, its insertion point is on the humerus there. So you could see that. And then the bulk of it is the origin. It's along the spine there, the spinal process. So the fulcrum in this instance is the shoulder, the ball and socket there, that joint. Okay. The effort is where the insertion point is in the lat there. You see that little part where it's now inserting onto the humerus. So that's the effort part. The load is now our hands on the bar. So just think about, in terms of the length between the fulcrum and the effort, or the insertion point, is very small, especially relative to how long your arm is and the pull-up bar. So that lat has to create a huge amount of force relative because it has a much shorter lever arm. So that is why pull-ups among most dryland exercises are so difficult, because you are fighting against, in terms of this mechanical disadvantage, that the force arm is much shorter than the resistance arm. So that's why it really takes a lot to do pull-ups. So don't beat yourself up. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. Everyone has to deal with this third-class lever and mechanical disadvantage. Now, the other thing that you need to know before we get into how to actually help people do pull-ups or improve on pull-up and their pull-up ability is different muscle contraction types. So a muscle can only pull. Now, if you have never heard that or thought about that, just let that sit for a little bit, because it's a big concept to understand. Is muscles can only pull, they can only contract. Well, Chris, I thought we have half our exercises are pushing exercises, right? Correct, because the muscles on the front side are pulling to contract and push my arm out. My chest muscles are actually pulling my arm forward, and therefore I end up doing a pushing motion. So muscles can only pull, they cannot push anything. They can only pull from the point of insertion and origin. They pull and contract smaller together. Now, this looks very different, or can, and express itself in three different ways. So concentric is when you're actually seeing that muscle contract and something move here. So as my bicep here, if I want to pull my hand towards my face, that's a concentric muscle action for my bicep. Eccentric would be the opposite. If someone is trying to pull my arm away from my face, but I'm resisting, right? I'm not just letting them do it. That would be an eccentric muscle contraction, where I'm still contracting, but overall the muscles are lengthening. And then isometric is where it's staying the same. They're not changing the length. Now, where this comes into play is on the eccentric. Okay, we already saw that lever arm. We already had a mechanical disadvantage. So it's hard in general just to start doing pull-ups. You can work a muscle harder eccentrically than concentrically. And this is going to come into play in specifically how we get better at pull-ups. So it's important that you understand muscle can only pull, and these three different types of muscle actions. Concentric, remember, that's where it's shortening. Eccentric, where it's lengthening, but we're still contracting. And then isometric, where it's not changing. So the isometric muscle action, if you go back to the flexed arm hang, that's actually what we're testing. It's isometric. There's no real movement. And if there is, it means you probably are done with the test because the chin went below the bar. The last thing I'll say before we actually get into these exercises is the third thing to keep in mind is this idea of progressive overload. And so one of these pictures here, Milo with the bull here, this is a fable that really applies to strength and conditioning. And the idea was that Milo went out every day and he would pick up this baby bull. And over time, because he did it every day and carried it, he got stronger as the bull got bigger. So by the time the bull was fully grown, he was still able to carry it because every single day he did a carry. That's the exact mindset you need to have with pull-ups. This is not something where you do 2 or even 3 times a week. You need to dedicate yourself to doing a little bit of something every day for the pull-ups. It's similar to the last few webinars we've done in terms of core training and shoulder, that these things really need to be done as frequently as possible and not just saved for our 2 to 3 dryland sessions in a week. All right. And then the last thing I'll say before we really get into the exercise is the SAD principle in terms of making sure there's specific adaptations here to impose demand. So if we want to get better at pull-ups, we have to be doing things that look like pull-ups. You can't just wish it and get better at pull-ups. So now let's talk about building up your pull-up ability. I'm going to take a quick drink as we dive in here. Just another pet peeve of mine. I need to make sure everybody knows where I stand. This is not the type of pulling that helps your shoulder. All right. Pull-ups, rows, things like that. This is the pulling that will ultimately help your shoulder. So let's see how we can get better at this. Now, with pull-ups, we've talked about it in the last webinar with the shoulder and the scapula, the position, right? That can be an issue. If you don't have a lot of shoulder mobility, pull-ups are inherently going to be harder. We've already talked about making sure you get to full extension, not necessarily locked out, but loose elbows, no kipping or moving. We want to stay in a narrow hallway when we're doing pull-ups, up and down here, and stay a little bit engaged. Make sure your core is engaged as you go. How I think about building the pull, and specifically the pull-up, is these three kind of stages. So the first one is we want to groove it. And this also is conjunction with making sure you're improving your bracing capability. The second phase is then loading it. This is where we're going to get bigger range of motion. TUT is time under tension. How much longer can we have the muscles contracting under tension? And then we can also increase the load. And then the final one is overloading the pull-up. And this is pretty advanced, where if you're not at double digits yet, this phase really isn't that applicable to you. You're going to stay in those first two phases. So that's where we're going to spend the majority of our time here today. So in grooving the pull, the couple exercises I really go to first is the flexed arm hang. Even though we use it as a test, I would still use this in training. And then the other one that's similar to that is the active passive hang. The goal is that you want to at least be able to do each of these for 30 seconds minimum. But you saw we want to be closer to a minute ultimately to get runway to be able to do a full pull-up. And then there are also some other supplemental exercises that we'll show you as well. All of them aren't necessarily in a pull-up fashion, but they're assistant exercises that are going to help you develop that strength over time. So flexed arm hang, we already saw this. Again, most of you, if you're having to be at this stage, you need something to step up or a partner to help hold you up. Make sure you're staying engaged the whole time, overhand grip. And the higher you can keep your chin, the better. Even if you can get the bar all the way to your chest, that'd be great. And then just slowly sink over time. But the minute that chin is below the bar, just stop, take a little bit of rest, and then you can repeat. Here's the active passive hang. And this goes back to the shoulder packing that I was talking about earlier. You see, there's really not a lot of movement to this. Now, depending on how high you're hanging up, you can keep your feet higher or lower. Obviously, the higher your feet are, the more difficult that exercise is going to be. But all we're doing is just unpacking and repacking the shoulder here. And learning that is a really critical, especially at this beginner stage, because we want athletes to pack in their shoulder while they're doing pull-ups. It's not only going to strengthen them, but it's going to help protect the shoulder as well. And especially for swimmers, we want to do everything we can in dryland to make sure the shoulder is protected. So 30 seconds is the minimum goal we're looking for. On each of these, we want to get closer to a minute over time with it. Here's where the different muscle contractions comes into play. So remember the eccentric, right? The idea of I have my bicep flexed and someone is pulling my arm away, but I'm resisting. I'm not just letting it fly away. It's the eccentric part. So for pull-ups, what we do is a drop-down pull-up where we're just working the eccentric part. Even though this is slow motion, you still want to go as slow as possible. Now, this athlete, obviously, we've already seen him do pull-ups multiple times, so we know he can. But you start off this exercise the same way you would the flexed arm hang. So a partner helps you up, or you step up, however you want to get in that up position, like we did for the flexed arm hang. But now the whole point is how slow and even can you lower yourself, especially at the beginning. Don't just kind of go quick and then go the rest slow. It's a slow, even pace throughout the whole range of motion. And for these, you only need a handful, because if you're doing more than 5, you're going to start shortchanging yourself on the rate that you're letting yourself go down or the range of motion. So I really keep these reps pretty low. Usually 5 is the max that I do when I'm prescribing it in a round. And that's so that the athletes can really focus on it. I'd rather you do 2 excellent than 5 fast and sloppy ones on that. Now, here's starting some other exercises that don't necessarily look like pull-ups, quote unquote, but they really help. This bat wing is the great one. You can use dumbbells or kettlebells with this. You need a bench to lay down, and you're really engaging your shoulder blades, pinching them together. If you have someone, I would have a coach or a partner kind of touch in between the shoulder blades so the athlete can really understand, yeah, I'm driving those shoulder blades together, driving the elbows up. And then engagement along your back should go all the way down to your hips, even your hamstrings a little bit. Sometimes I like to have the athletes pick up their legs a little bit off the bench so I know they're engaged all the way through their body, because this is going to ultimately help when we get to pull-ups. So that was the grooving phase. Beginner phase, where we're just trying to get those muscles to fire up. If I could summarize it in one way, it's helping the brain recruit what musculature they need for pull-ups. So that's what that phase is about. Now, let's look at adding some load. So all these abbreviations here, I said before, so ROM, range of motion. So we want as big a range of motion as possible, right? And again, you don't have to lock your elbows out the bottom, but I want them at least loose and as high up as we can too. Eventually, I want you doing pull-ups to where your chest is at the bar, not just your chin, barely getting over. I want to do pull-ups where we're getting chest to the bar. TUT, time under tension. So think about the drop down pull-ups. And let's say you're still a very beginner level. And so you're only able to do, let's say 1 second on the way down. Well, TUT would be, let's increase that to 3 seconds. And that's the goal. So even if you can't get it every rep, the goal, it would be take 3 seconds to go all the way down into drop down pull-up. And load would be a combination of, are we doing more like volume, or it could also be adding external resistance like a dumbbell or a weight belt on that. So let's actually go through the progressions here. And a lot of these are going to start with actually not on a pull-up bar at all. We're going to have a TRX or other suspension system attached to a pull-up bar. And so we're going to shorten the angles a little bit here to actually get a mechanical advantage. We talked about mechanical disadvantages earlier. Now we're getting a mechanical advantage. So with this seated pull-up angled means where the TRX is anchored at. So it's angled out a little bit, and that's going to help you. 2 feet on the ground, and I want you to feel free to push off of those 2 feet as much as you need. So it's not just the arms. This is very similar to the bat wing too. You see this motion here. So this is why the bat wing was the very first exercise, and when we're trying to groove it. If you're not good at the bat wing, this is going to be a struggle for you. So driving those elbows back, pinching shoulder blades together, and as much help as you need, push through your feet to get up. You can also see every rep clearly the chin is above the hands, almost getting the hands to the chest. This is practicing ultimately for more of a chest pull-up. So we want to start those habits early here. Now we make this a little bit more difficult. So now you're only pushing off of 1 foot, and you can alternate. It doesn't really matter back and forth. I probably would at least alternate somewhat, so you're not always on one leg. So now you only have 1 leg to push off of. We're still trying to get the hands all the way to the chest, so chins are clearly over where the hands are, mimicking how the pull-up's going to feel, driving the elbows back, pushing through that foot as much as you need to. Now we start to really look like pull-ups here. So assisted pull-up with a band. There are multiple types of bands that you can get. So this band is long enough that the athlete can put their foot in. That's not always the case, and that's okay. You just need to kind of know what your band is able to do. If it can put through the foot, then you're probably going to get more assistance, or excuse me, less assistance than if it was short enough that you could only put your knee through. So I've used both. Not a big deal either way. You just need to know if it's with the foot through, it's giving you less assistance than if you put your knee through it, you're getting a little bit more assistance. Also, the width of the bands are important. So what I've found over time is a 1-inch band that was only small enough that I could put the athlete's knee through. This is much longer than that. The 1-inch band that put the knee through, if we could do 10 solid assisted pull-ups, full range of motion, I know they can do at least 1, maybe even 2 pull-ups at that point. And so that would be the goal that we would work up to. Sometimes I'd have to have athletes start with a 1.5-inch thick band, huge thick band around their knee, but we just start with that. Can we get 5 reps? Can we get 10 reps? And grooving that movement, then we would switch to the 1-inch band. And then you can also have 1/2-inch bands as well. So let's say you're right around like a pull-up, maybe a pull-up and a half. That would be a good thing to help you get over that hump. So now we're at 5+ pull-ups eventually. So these 3 exercises here in progression, go back to the start here. So the single leg angled, just the angled, then we get the single leg angled, and then we get assisted pull-ups. These 3 is really where you're going to spend a lot of your time progressing. After you've done the groove, after you feel confident that you can hang there for 30+ seconds, these 3 exercises are really your home base for how to eventually being able to do multiple pull-ups. Here's some more assistance exercises that you can throw in, supplemental ones as well. The row, you can see here, the athlete needs to have a pretty good hinge to be able to get even in that position to do a row. And you can do this with barbells or dumbbells as well, making sure you're pulling that bar as much as you can to your chest to get a big range of motion. And going back to using the suspension system, we have the bent knee row. Now, if you want a little easier, you just go a regular row where you're on your heels, and that angle is going to make it easier. This bent knee row is where you're trying to get as much directly underneath the anchor point and pulling the hands right to the chest. You can see how these are starting to look a little bit similar over time, and we're just changing really the orientation or intensity of the exercise. So now let's say you're one of the 1/3 of the group that said, hey, I can do 5+ pull-ups. Now, this is where we're talking to you. How do you improve upon 5+? So for 2/3 of you, we already kind of covered where you need to be in order to get to the place where you can do 5+ pull-ups. It's all those exercises I just showed you. If we're going beyond that, now let's actually overload the pull-up here. So chin-ups are easier than pull-ups, but we still alternate in programming. I like to change things up. So chin-ups, you're going to be underhand grip. And typically what I've found is if you're in the double digits on pull-ups, you can do 2 to 3 more reps doing a chin-up than a pull-up. So it's usually at least good for 1 or 2 extra reps, just changing the orientation there. It's also a little bit easier on the shoulder as well. So if your shoulders are ever acting up a little bit, just switch more to chin-ups than pull-ups for a little bit to help that subside. Pull-ups, obviously, we've seen this multiple times now, but just again, chin clearly above the bar on every rep, narrow hallway, you're not swinging a lot, and you're going to that full extension, not necessarily elbows locked, but elbows are soft on that. Now we get into weighted pull-ups here, okay? So this is, you can do this a couple ways. So athlete here has a weight belt on and then a ball around it. You can also do this, put dumbbells. I know it's a little bit hard to see the lighting, but he has a dumbbell in between his legs, kind of resting right above his knees. So you kind of cross your legs a little bit. You can have the dumbbell there. It's really great when you're just trying to add anywhere from 5 to 20 pounds. Once you get to around 25 pounds, I really prefer the weight belt and having a plate hanging there on it. It's just a little bit easier to deal with. You saw earlier when we were talking about loading the pull-up, increasing time under tension. This is a great example of that. The side-to-side pull-up, we're getting a little bit more time, and even how you can lengthen the time even more is when you go side, chainsaw over, and then down. And so now you're almost going to a more triangle. That's an even more advanced version of the side-to-side pull-up here. And so we're just increasing time under tension and having go to side to side. If you go back and remember the mechanical disadvantage in that 3rd class lever we talked about, think about how much more it's at a disadvantage now. If we're going to one side, we're overloading one arm and the other arm is just getting a little bit of a rest. This can really increase the intensity of the exercise. So for those of you that can do 5+, start adding these in a little bit as well. Here's some assistance exercises, and we start to have power. When you get to 5+ pull-ups, and it's really closer to 10 in my mind, then we can start adding in elements of power on this on a more regular basis. And the slam with the med ball is one of my favorites. So staying tall, I don't want you bending over and leaning. I want you staying tall as possible. Think about like that breaststroke pullout as you're doing right off the block. You're just slamming that ball as hard as you can into the ground. Obviously, it's better if you use the non-bouncy medicine ball so you don't have one return right up into your face. Never like those safety issues. So non-bouncy is best. And that's almost a litmus test, if you will, how much power you can exert. If you can throw it so hard down that it kind of bounces around to your belly button or chest, that's really good power. A lot of athletes, when they start doing this, it's more around the knees or thighs. And so that can be something that you can watch over time and improve is for the non-bouncy balls, getting up to around your belly button or chest so you can just grab it and do another rep. Another one I really like, and again, this is much more advanced. I wouldn't do this for anyone that could not do at least 10+ pull-ups, is speed pull-ups with a band. So you're going to need a rack to set this up. And it's the same type of super band that we used earlier in the assisted pull-ups here. And we did this a lot, especially with that professional group of swimmers leading into Beijing. This is one of the favorite exercises I liked in terms of programming it in. And we got really specific. I'll talk about that in a second. But the idea is you want to set up the band so it's on those racks there where you would typically rack the bar. And it takes a little bit of time to kind of figure out where's the right height for it, but you just want to make it feel at 50% or less effort per pull-up. So you want the athlete to be able to go really fast up and down, but they're also having to push themselves down as well. So you get a little bit different feel. Now, where we made this specific and why I keep showing you the phone in this video here is for the elite athletes, especially the freestylers. I'm thinking like Colin that I worked with or a couple other sprinters, they had very specific stroke rates that they were trying to hit, typically 0.8, 0.9 cycles per second, okay? So what we did is with pull-ups, we said, okay, for 10 seconds, and sometimes we did it more 5 starting off, but somewhere within that range, how many pull-ups can you do? And we did the math in terms of, okay, if you're at a stroke rate of 0.8 or 0.9, we want you to do X number of pull-ups in a 5 or 10 second period. And so this is where I start to sprinkle a little bit more in the swimming specific. So it's not like we're trying to mimic the actual stroke. I just want the muscles to start to get used to having to fire that quickly, because that's really what we want them to do in the pool. So this is kind of a fun thing that spices up Dryland a little bit. But again, this is not something I would even waste my time with a beginner if they can't do at least 10 pull-ups. We're not doing this exercise. It's just not ready yet. We need to build that base of strength first, because this is adding on that power on top of the strength. The other thing, in terms of if you are able to do pull-up bars on deck, like screwing it in to cement walls or stuff like that, is you can really take advantage of what's called post-activation potential. And I'll tell you how I would do this. So in terms of pull-up bars on deck, you could have your athletes do even just a couple pull-ups. We're not even talking about a lot. If they can do 5, I'd have them do 2. If they could do 10, I'd have them do 5, somewhere below their max. You're not trying to fatigue them to the max with this. So just a little touch. So if they can do 5 pull-ups, I'm having them do 1 or 2, then jump in the water and do a fast all-out 25, 15-meter sprint. Do that in a circuit a couple times. Athletes are really going to be able to feel, oh, that's how I engage in my pull and my lat. And so I'm not trying to use this as a way to fatigue them. In some ways, I'm using it as a way to help them understand, oh, yeah, this is my lat. This is what it's got to feel like to anchor down and really get a big catch of water. And so that's why we want to be sub-maximal when we're doing this, trying to take advantage of that post-activation potential. And again, this is in the middle of the workout, right? Where we're kind of jumping out on deck, doing some quick pull-ups, jumping and doing a sprint. Many a Saturdays, especially, I would do circuits like this. And the kids really were able to feel that's what my pull feels like, or should feel like, is engaging all this musculature. So just doing a few pull-ups beforehand can really help. Even if they need to be assisted, that's okay. Put on a band, do that. It's just you want to be about close to 50% of sub-max for whatever athletes you're working with, so you don't get fatigued and they can still jump in the water and do some fast stuff. All right. So we covered a lot with pull-ups here. I can't believe I got through all that in about 45 minutes here. We got plenty of time for questions. I want to know, though, put in the chat, what did you learn? I always like to hear from you guys what you learned in terms of pull-ups. Are you more beginner? Or are you more advanced? Let me know in the chat right now while I take a break, get a little bit of water, what you guys learned today. See what you guys are saying in the chat here. What age group would you start this program? Randy, great question. As I would say, if we're working with like 9 and 10s, if they're more on the better paying attention, you could start there, but definitely 11 and 12s, definitely 11 and 12s working on that progression. All right. Look like a lot of you enjoyed the progressions here and the alternating exercises. Bruce, glad you enjoyed the hierarchy there. Yeah, Jonathan, 2 pull-ups and a fast 50. It's really can be a game changer if you're programming both sides of it right. And again, that's making sure we're not doing too much fatigue on land and you're not doing too much volume in the water as well. Thanks, Heidi. Glad you learned something on that. Awesome, guys. Yeah, so where you go from here is kind of up to you. We have resources, obviously, in the Surge Strength Academy. You can choose to do nothing with this, go it alone, or check out the resources that we have. And so, Sergio, I'll get to your question in a second. And feel free to put questions in, guys, as we're coming up on the Q&A. But we're continuing to onboard so many people in our Surge Strength program. So that's a great place to start if you feel like pull-ups is only one of the things you need to improve on Dryland, one of the more recent podcasts we put out with Maddie about how she wasn't really into swimming and then worked with us for about a year, ended up getting her first futures cut. Now she's all excited about it. It's awesome. But a lot of stories we continue to have. We're onboarding a ton of new teams and individuals. It's a great option. One of my still favorite stories, longest tenured clients too, 15 plus years working with us, Ernie and Bernie, 72 pull-ups on their 72nd birthday. That's awesome. That's my goal when I'm 72, being able to do 72 pull-ups on my birthday. Way to set the standard, Ernie and Bernie. And so you can check out more, surgestrength.com. You can schedule a free call with me and we'll talk more about the programs and the options here. But what I wanted to talk to you guys about is this newest Dryland plan that I created. And so I've been creating a couple. So we already have the core training, the shoulder health. The newest one here is pull-up strength. So for this one, I'm going to show you even more deep dive. So I kind of gave you an overview today of the exercise. I'm going to give you actual progressions to follow on a regular basis to improve your pull-ups. Whether you can't do any pull-ups, you can barely hang on the bar for 30 seconds, or if you're at least able to do one or two. If you're 10 or plus pull-ups, probably wait, I'll do an advanced pull-up Dryland plan at some point. But if you're less than 10, this will really help you. And we're going to even add in a couple core workouts in it as well, because those two go together so well. But you're going to have access to our exercise library with teaching cues on all the exercises as well. And I really think about these Dryland plans as short, actionable. It's less than 1.5, 2 hours or so to get through. You get a sheet of paper to follow through the progressions, and you can really increase your pull-up ability, which is going to increase your pulling power and speed in the water. So I'll actually put this in the chat here, the URL that you guys can go to. So this is at a discounted price right now because I am working on it currently. I'm looking to have it ready by mid-July. All right, guys, so put the link in there that you could check it out. So again, discounted price because it's not live yet. The shoulder health one should be going live by the end of today. So getting about a few weeks to get all these done through here. But here's how you know if it's not for you. If you're still kind of kicking the tires, if you haven't even signed up for a 101, do that first. Don't worry about this. At least get in the 101s. It's the free course. Check that out first. And we're not giving you magic stuff. I would be charging a lot more if this was just some magic potion that all of a sudden, you do these two exercises and all of a sudden you're doing 10 plus pull-ups. It's not possible. And I know all of you are looking to learn if you took time out of your day to be at the webinar. So I don't think that really applies. But guys, Dryland, we've really, I feel good about how we're approaching it with Surge Strength, and the results continue to back up what we're doing, whether it's working with someone like Cullen to get his gold medal there in Beijing, or someone like Mark won multiple gold medals and really challenged me on how we're doing Dryland and why, and is now doing an excellent job at UNC building back up that program. But again, Dryland can be a game changer, whether you're young like Maddie who needs a renewal passion, or you're like Ernie and Bernie, more in their senior years, but they're still loving life. They're feeling good about their body. They're still enjoying the sport. That's so awesome. So, all right, guys, feel free. We got about 10 minutes for Q&A. Drop that in the chat there, and I'll get through them as best I can. And I'll leave this up on the screen for you if you guys want to check that out. All right. So let's see here. Actually, guys, I'm going to leave it on, since the link's in the chat, I'm going to leave it on this screen just so you know, because I do know there were a good bit of new people. So checking out the programs or the academies, all the different options there. All right, Q&A, here we go. Let's see what we got. Betty, elbow pain. That is a tough one. So number one, make sure you have a local therapist, physical therapist, chiropractor, someone that can check you out visually to make sure there's nothing inherently wrong that you are making worse. But elbow tendonitis, that is a tricky thing to get over. And I would really make sure I'm seeing a therapist in person, maybe even find a good manual therapist to help break some of that stuff up. The other thing, so if you're beyond those stages, the other thing that really helps is if you can have handles that allow you more neutral grip, or even the handles that kind of move and let that movement happen a little bit more at the wrist and then down at the elbow. Really take it slow though with pull-ups. We have had in the 15 years, there's one client that comes to mind where we battled elbow pain kind of back and forth. And it's really, really sensitive where I remember if we even increased like 1 rep, we were doing like 3 rounds of pull-ups and we increased 1 rep 1 week and it started to flare up and we had to back off. You have to be so patient and slow with your progressions in addition to seeking treatment for it outside of Dryland. So it can be done. It is just a long road, and just be slow and patient with it. And if you're doing any type of pull-ups, make sure you have something that allows some movement or a neutral grip for your wrists here. Okay. Awesome. All right, Rick, how many rep sets would you train daily compared to max reps? So Rick, that's a good question. So if we're at least able to say, I'm assuming you can at least do, let's say just 5 pull-ups. Okay. If we're doing that, if I had a pull-up bar, especially at my house, I would just walk by it and make sure 3 to 5 times a day, I'm doing just 1 to 2 pull-ups. I don't even need to max out per se. It's really more just greasing that groove. And then once you're to the point where you're 10 plus, that can still help somewhat, walking by doing 1 or 2, but then we can focus more on overloading those few sessions with that. So if you're below 10 pull-ups, it's basically the more, the better, as long as it's good form. And, especially if you're just walking by it, just do 1 or 2 reps. And that over time really adds up to it. The max reps, because it's pull-ups, if you max out, then it's really hard to then come back. And usually even in a rest period, athletes don't come back. So I rarely fully max out pull-ups. I always like to keep 1 rep in reserve with pull-ups when I'm doing like a 45, 60-minute Dryland workout, because that way I know we can still get some quality as we're going through it. But good question on that. Cynthia, I like the idea of incorporating the TRX exercises and the suggestions to do something daily. Why we wait until later to use the med ball pull-ups, speed pull-ups, these exercises that come more easily to me I can do 1 pull-up if I'm rested level. Yeah. So Cynthia, so it goes back to that pyramid example, right? I want to build out the strength. And then so that allows us to really increase power and endurance. It's not that it's bad necessarily. It's just, I think it's a little bit more wasting of your time to have that come out, where I would rather do a couple more, drop down pull-ups or bat wings or something else that's going to accelerate your progress. There's nothing inherently wrong with doing the slams or even the speed pull-ups with the band, but it's just not going to help with the strength that much. So if you're more just looking for some variety, that's fine. It's nothing inherently wrong with it. I just don't think it's worth your time if you're still right around that 1 pull-up range. I think all the other exercises I showed you in the grooving and the building of the pull-up, those are going to be much more worth your time adding in there. What are the minimum number of full body weight pull-ups that a male and female teenage swimmer should aim for? Perfect. I already put that down. 15 plus for male, 10 plus for female is what I'm looking for by the time they're age 18 or earlier if we can do it. But that's really the line in the sand that when we think about like Dryland standards at surge strength is what do we want them to do by 12? And at that point, it's more movement-based related, not so much numbers. But by the time they're 18, 15 and 10 plus is what we're looking for. Surly, I tried to use bands for assisted pull-ups, so it's very hard to step on the band. Yeah, so that may be a band where I was talking about where you need to put your knee into it. Not all of them can they stretch all the way out to put your feet in. And a lot of times I felt that was even more difficult to put the feet in sometimes. So the knee one's good. Try that with the knee. And sometimes you need a partner to kind of pull it down a little bit and help you out for it. All right, Jonathan, I'm fine doing as kids improve pull-ups. Elbow pain increases too. That's what I'm finding. Yeah, so Jonathan, that kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where if there's elbow pain, back off. You're doing something wrong. And it may also be shoulder mobility issues as well. So refer back to our previous webinar. I have seen some correlations with that over the years where swimmers have pretty poor mobility in the shoulder. So they need to get the mobility somewhere. So then it goes to the elbow, and the elbow is being asked to do things it's not supposed to. Then it starts getting beat up. And once you start getting elbow pain, it is so long to get it taken care of. So if they're having elbow issues now, try to make sure you get some straps that can be neutral grip, work on shoulder mobility. And I would send those kids to make sure they get checked out personally and probably some manual therapy as well to help you get a jump start on that. So yeah, I didn't even see down at the bottom, the ring pull-ups. Yeah. So things like that move a little bit more, that would be good. And maybe play around with doing more rows, like a bent knee row or just the inverted row with the rings, and take some time away from the actual movement of pull-ups. That could be another way to let that reset a little bit as well. Guys, thanks for the questions. Keep putting them in. I've got about 6 more minutes here. We'll get through as many as we can. Melissa, do you need to warm up before doing pull-ups? It can definitely help your performance, but at the same time, I don't think it's a necessary requirement, especially if you're not going max. If you're going to go for like a max effort on reps or weight or something like that, absolutely, I want you warmed up. But if we're just talking about, hey, let's just do 1 or 2 while we walk by, not an issue, especially if you're trying to grease that groove where, you're walking by your pull-up bar at home and just doing 1 or 2 reps. Don't need to really worry about a warm-up on that. All right, next one, Sergio. All right, guys, keep the questions. Sergio, what about speed-based execution of concentric phase? Is there any benefit of performing explosive over normal execution? If any, is there I'm not sure, something specific speed for developing power? Oh, meters per second there. I got you. So trying to understand. Yeah, so Sergio, I think I kind of answered that. I'm having a hard time understanding what specifically you're asking, but I think it's valuable once an athlete can do 10 plus pull-ups, male or female. Now we're in the stage where that exercise in particular, that speed band assisted, I think is really valuable. And at the start, I'm not going to be worried about, how many seconds, what's their rate, like how we would do a stroke rate correlation. That was with the guys that are trying to make the Olympic team and win gold medals. So you don't have to go to that extreme when you're working with 14, 15-year-olds. Even just saying, hey, do 5 pull-ups as fast as you can, ready, go. And over time, maybe then you can start to see how long that took them and can we get that time down more. But I wouldn't go to that unless they can do 10 plus. But once they can do 10 plus, start to introduce it like that and just start with how fast can you do 5? And then we go from there. Lisa, yes, there will be always replays available. If you register, that's the question, guys. And we get this question emailed to us so many times. Just register for the webinar and you'll get the email sent to you, even if you can't show up, not a problem. All right, Dr. Brown. Ooh, guys are sending in questions. My thing's jumping around. All right. Yeah, he liked using the PAP, the post-activation potential. The neutral grip. So neutral grip, Shirley, is, if you think about, this is pull-ups, this is chin-ups, this would be neutral. So it's usually like what the bar is sticking out, or I forget who said earlier about like ring pull-ups, where it allows you. So this is that neutral grip. So this is pull-ups, chin-ups, neutral. All right. All right, guys, I don't see any more questions. Oh, one more. Cynthia, can you suggest a minimal warm-up activation exercise to do prior to doing a full pull-up? So something, it doesn't have to be like pull-up specific. I would think about a total body weight. So something like a couple push-ups, maybe like a Spider-Man stretch, a cook squat, a single leg layout, and then like a bear crawl, just do that a round or 2. I'm looking for more global warmups if we're looking for that. If you want more specific ones, then you could do something like a bat wing, or even one of the assist exercises that are going to be easier. That could even serve as the warm-up as well. Awesome. Guys, thanks so much. Appreciate you joining the webinars. We'll see you next time. We'll put out when the next one is, be sometime in July. Not 100% sure what the topic is yet, so I won't advertise that yet. But again, discount on the Dryland plan for pull-up strength for swimmers, surgestrength.com/pull-up, all one word, or check us out for our programs. And if you haven't, enroll in the Academy. Check out the free 101 courses if you haven't already. All right, guys, thanks again. We'll see you next time.